Hello, Freedom Forgers! Hey, it's Patriot Gal here with a take two of Is War Coming to America? Hey, I did an episode earlier today, and I just wasn't happy with it, but there was some good stuff in it, so I decided to leave it there and just do the episode over again. So if you've got time, listen to them both because there's some good stuff um, in the first one. But hey, Rain Country, welcome to the Forging Freedom podcast. I hope you can stay for a little bit too. I appreciate it. I still got chores to do myself. Yeah, I had to pick some blackberries today that black raspberries today that I had neglected to pick for the last couple of days. And if you don't stay on them every day, they dry up and or fall off, and then they quit getting ripe and start to dry up. So you got to stay on top of them this time of year. I completely understand. Well, hey, let me just welcome everybody. And, it's our mission to help you build personal liberty one step at a time. And that's what we're here to do. And, today is Saturday, July 22nd, 2017. And this evening we're going to discuss the possibility and the probability of war in America and some things that you can do to prepare for that possibility. So stay tuned and hang out with us. First thing I'd like to do, though, is thank everybody who has been shopping through our Amazon link to buy the things that you need for your family and your homestead. We don't make much through their little commission program, but it all helps this channel keep up and running. So if you don't know how this works, let me give you the lowdown. So in the show notes of every live or every video that we put on YouTube, on our channel, you'll find an Amazon link to our store and also items that we use every day. And you can use these links to buy those things that we show you or anything else that you might need for your family. And the best part is it doesn't cost you a dime extra to go through our link, but we make a small commission. And that helps the Forging Freedom podcast to keep coming to you week after week. So again, thank you to those of you who have been doing that for us. So let me just give you the weekly recap. Tell you what's been going on here at the Forging Freedom Homestead. So the baby chicks have been growing like crazy. They're pretty much feathered out now. And I have a light on them still, but I really think it's probably unnecessary. It was pretty cold last night. And when I woke up this morning, they weren't under the light. They were all kind of in the back. And they're starting to roost on their little roosting sticks that I've put in there for them. And I'll be doing a video soon to show you my kind of makeshift brooder that I've got for them. I originally brooded them in a sheep watering trough that I had laying around, but there was 13 of them and there got to be too many, so I had to build something else. So I usually just throw things together, what I've got laying around. I don't build anything or buy anything special. So that's been going on, and I shot 3 videos this week that I'll be editing and posting up, and let me tell you what they're about, and you guys let me know which ones you want me to post first. So the first one that I did was is called Succession Planting from Garlic to Golden Beets, and it's basically just about how when you pull one thing out, you can put a little compost or a little bit of bunny poo in there, and then plant something else right back in that same spot, so that it prevents the weeds from getting in, and that just keeps your food production coming. So I've got one about that. The second one is how to trim, tie, and store your hardneck garlic. We had a wonderful garlic harvest this year. I planted 4 different kinds. They all turned out fantastic. But, you can't braid hardneck garlic like you do softneck garlic. So I can show you how to do that. And then the third one is how to train your chickens to eat comfrey and other wild edibles. Now, one thing that I've noticed in years of raising chickens is that if you try to feed them natural foods from your garden, things that you grow, scraps, that type of thing, it seems to me like you've got to really get started on that early, or else they kind of just develop a taste for the commercial feed or whatever you're feeding them, and they don't really, like right now I can throw the baby chicks, well, they're not baby chicks, they're somewhere in between, they're teenagers right now. but I can throw them, 4 or 5 giant leaves of comfrey, and they absolutely tear it apart and munch it down. Now I can take those same leaves and throw them out to my existing rooster and the hens, and they just kind of come over and scratch them a little bit and then just walk away. They're not interested at all. And I've brooded enough chicks and brought them to adulthood that I've found that whatever you feed them when they're young, that's what they prefer. So anyway, that's going to be one of the videos. So let's see. Heather says succession planning would be great. Okay. Yeah, that's kind of timely for this time of year, right? So maybe I'll do that one first. All right. So on to the main topic of the show. So, kind of a dark topic tonight, but it's something that we have to think about. Is war coming to America? This topic has been on my mind for some time. And as I keep a pulse on what's going on in the world and I read different articles, I've kind of felt a sense of urgency about the subject, and I felt like I felt driven that I really had to do something. And lo and behold, this morning, usually the first thing I do when I roll over in the morning is check YouTube and see what's been posted overnight, and check out my favorite channels and stuff like that. And the first thing that I saw was a video from Brad over there at Full Spectrum Survival, and he was talking on the very same subject. And so, there's kind of something in the air, folks. So that reinforced to me even more that I needed to do this. And so I'll put a link to his episode in the show notes, and I would highly suggest that you watch that episode. It's fairly short, but very good, and he makes some excellent points in there. So here's the 3 possibilities that I see lining up, and we'll discuss why I think these are worth paying attention to. The first scenario that I see is a possibility of civil war. And let me just see, I'm checking the notes here, the comments here, stand by. Rain Country says, I started feeding my chicks cut up slugs to give them a taste, and it worked. They love them, and I'm grateful. Yeah, I find the same thing, that you can train them. So I agree with you. All right, so the first scenario that I see that's maybe not probable, but possible, okay? The country is so divided right now. I think it's more divided than any other time in my lifetime. And when I read through the history of the country, I can't really find a time where we were this divided. I mean, when you go back in history, at least you find that people had common morals. I don't see that right now. And we are so divided that there are people that are within our federal government that oppose this president that we have elected in, and maybe you voted for him, maybe you didn't. Maybe he's not your guy. But the fact of the matter is, he is the duly elected president of the United States, and we have people that are holdovers from the last administration and possibly the administration prior to that, that do not agree with this president, and they are doing everything they can to sabotage him. There's many, many leaks of information coming out of private meetings that shouldn't be being leaked. There's people trying to sabotage on all levels, and the country is just so divided. And I think that I don't want to say that these differences can't be reconciled, because there's always an opportunity for that. But what I see with the 2 different sides, and obviously and always there are people in between, but if you take the 2 extremes of each side, we've got people on one side that believe that abortion is okay, and not only is it okay, but they celebrate it and promote it. And that disturbs me. There's the other side of the coin, where people believe that terminating the life of a baby, let's face it, it's a baby, is simply murder, and murder of our youngest and most defenseless citizens. And I don't know how you reconcile that. I see that chasm as being unable to be bridged. There are people who believe that government is the answer to everything, and there are people that believe government is the problem and simply gets in our way. And of course, there are everything in between. But there definitely is a deep divide right now. And I'm a God-fearing gal, and I don't think I've ever seen, some people are in an outright war with God and with doing what's right. Things that are very, you know, wrong are being made to seem right, and things that are right are being made to seem wrong, and everything is just upside down and in turmoil. And back to, the election, this deep state problem, these people that are within the government, they are trying to get our president impeached. And I think that if that happens, it will almost certainly lead to a civil war. I just don't think the people that voted for Trump are going to sit still if basically an internal coup takes place and they depose a sitting duly elected president. So anyway, that is just some thoughts. We got this Antifa groups, these anti-fascist groups that are on the left, and they're supposed to be battling fascism, okay? But apparently they don't know their history too much, because they are walking right down the footsteps of the brown shirts of an actual fascist movement, the Nazi regime. And they are very violent. They are very organized. And make no mistake about it, there is some big money behind them. They are basically the agitators for some big money that is trying to tear this country apart. And we could talk more in detail about, who those people are and how that works. But there are people that would love to see this country taken apart. Okay. The second thing that I see as a possibility is war with North Korea. It just recently came out that hang on, I'm just going to refresh my YouTube here. Always is behind on the comments. So it recently just came out through our intelligence agencies that they have discovered that North Korea is farther along in their nuclear warhead ballistic missile program than they ever thought before. They've disclosed that they definitely have a missile that can reach our coast, probably Alaska, and that it just seems logical to me that if they didn't know that and they admitted that they were behind and that they didn't have the good intel, that they could be wrong, and maybe they can reach the interior. So North Korea is definitely a threat. And the other thing I wanted to point out is I just read an article this week that the U.S. is basically recalling Americans from North Korea. I don't know why you would want to be in North Korea anyway, but people actually do go there. Hey, the Mad Nomader's back. He was here when I did the first episode this week. Hey, Matt, I decided to leave the episode in place, and I'm just doing the second episode. So I liked the first one, but I felt like I could do better. So here I am. I felt a little foggy today when I was doing that one. I didn't feel real energetic. So I just felt like you guys deserved better than that. So let's see, where was I? Yeah, so the U.S. is basically recalling Americans from North Korea, and they are putting restrictions on passports that you won't be able to travel to North Korea. What does this mean exactly? Well, typically, if you study history, a country does that, pulls their citizens out and restricts travel to a country when they're just about ready to put some kind of military action into play. So it seems like we are going to do something in regards to North Korea. And eventually we'll have to do something about them. We really have no choice. They are active. The guy that runs the place is just absolutely crazy. And frankly, anybody that would take his place is probably just as crazy. I've watched some documentaries about North Korea, and they are really, really brainwashed over there. And if they're not brainwashed, they're so terrified and petrified to speak out of turn because they have, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, because a lot of this stuff doesn't make the mainstream media. They're so busy with Trump, 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 Russia, 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 that they are ignoring the other things that are going on in the world that you might want to know about. That's why I don't watch the mainstream media, and I try to source a lot of things that are from reputable but diverse sources. And yeah, so North Korea, we're eventually going to have to do something about them. The guy is absolutely has declared war more than once. I mean, I think we've had a lot of restraint when it comes to North Korea. And the question arises, why haven't we done something before this? North Korea has been a problem ever since the Korean War. We've had this imaginary line drawn through the country, and it's been South Korea and North Korea. And why haven't we done something prior to this? Well, the big, elephant in the room is China. China backs North Korea. And there is a concern, I believe, that if we do something to North Korea, that the Chinese will unite with them, and possibly Russia unites with China, and that may kick off World War III. And so I think that's why we've had such restraint over the years, but it's getting to the point where our restraint is coming at our peril. And so I think, this president is going to have to do something, whether he wants to or not. So side note, Korea is a really mountainous country, and there's a guy I listen to it's called Soft Rep. It's a podcast, and it's all about, they have guests on from the special operations community, Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, CIA guys, that type of thing. And they tell a lot of the stories about past operations, at least as much as they're able to. They talk about, government cover-ups. I mean, government cover-ups are real. CIA cover-ups are real. And, they talk about these things. And if you really want to find out what's going on in that world, I'd suggest listening to that podcast. I tried to look for a link today where I could send you to listen to that. I can't find one. They do have a website, but I can't find a way that you can listen to the podcast from the website. But you can go to iTunes, search for SOFREP, that's SOFREP, and search for their podcast. It's free. They have a membership program. I think they produce 2 podcasts a week. One of them is free. One of them is paid content. But the free one is more than you probably ever want to listen to. But I listen to that as often as I can. And this guy that they were having on there the other day, he has spent a lot of time in Korea, Singapore, a lot of Asian countries, and he explains that when you look at a map of Korea, it looks relatively small, but Korea is a very mountainous country, and he said that their soldiers, both North and South Korea, have some of the fiercest fighters that he's ever seen, and they're known for that. They have a reputation for that. So I don't think that we're going to go over there and nuke North Korea, because we've got South Korea right next door. Whatever we do that way is going to affect them. And so I think it's going to be either some type of assassination type thing, which I don't know if that's wise, because, like I say, you might end up with a guy as crazy as this guy, or some tactical strikes on their nuke targets, where, it could be a conventional type of thing. And I think we, as Americans, we get a little bit cocky that, we can just go in and, kick everybody's butt. But, as we learned in Vietnam, it's not always that easy. Vietnam was a very small country, and they were very good at deploying. They had kicked the French's butt before we got there. And I think that nobody would argue with me that we did not achieve our objectives in Vietnam, which was to keep the South free and in a democracy instead of falling to communism. And, I talked about this in the earlier podcast today, but there's a lot of reasons for that. The country here at home was divided, was not behind the war for some legitimate reasons, but as we know, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And so that didn't help the effort. Also, I think the leadership of that war, the president, powers that be in Washington, D.C., they had one foot in and one foot out. Very political war, with all the unrest at home. I'm sure they were worried about re-election more than they were worried about winning that war. I have highest respect for every veteran that spent time over there. It was just a very difficult situation. But every vet you talk to over there would tell you that the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong were very good at deploying guerrilla tactics. And even though they lost many, many more soldiers than we did, ultimately they prevailed and they achieved their objective, and we did not. So I think it's a mistake to underestimate North Korea and what could happen there. Okay, I did want to mention that if you go over to that Special Operations Community SOFREP podcast, that they do use some pretty spicy language over there. But you need to realize that this is a warrior culture. It's how they talk. You can make the moral judgment if you want, but I think you'll find some value there in that you'll get to the bottom of what's really going on if you're interested in finding that out. So if you could, just put on your big girl shoes or big boy shoes and go listen to it for the value that is there and ignore the rest, I think you'll find some value there. The third thing that I think could be a problem is a serious economic crisis. Well, let me just take a look at the comments here before I get into that one. Let's see. Rain Country says, I voted for nobody and feel very cheated. Yeah, I really don't want to make this a political thing because I realize there's people on both sides of things. I don't think, Mad No Winner says, I don't think Trump will be the one. This has been going on for years. No one wants to throw the first dagger. Yeah, interesting. Let's see. Too much money involved. China is involved. Yeah, I understand that. But I'll tell you, if North Korea pulls off some attack, no president wants to have that under his watch. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. I just think it's interesting that they're pulling all the citizens out of North Korea. That was the red flag for me. Pulling the citizens out and changing it so that you can't travel to North Korea. That is usually a red flag when it comes to possible military action. So the third thing, economic crisis. So, things have been pretty good since the election economically. The stock market continues to set record highs. Unemployment's coming down. There's less people on food stamps than there has been in 7 years. I've read all these, headlines and these articles recently. But I think some complacency has been creeping in since the election. I think people that like Trump's style and like what's going on with the economy have, kind of become a little complacent in possibly their preparations and, being prudent with your home and stocking up that pantry and working on your skills and those type of things. Any economist will tell you that these record highs that are being set by the stock market are not sustainable, that the higher the stock market goes and the more times it hits record highs, that when it does have a correction, it's going to be a big one. And, you've heard the saying, the higher you go, the harder you fall. Yeah, it's kind of like that. And one thing comes back to me from the good book, and if you're not a particularly religious person, I get it, but I think that most people would agree that even if you don't believe that the Bible is the Word of God, it's full of wisdom. And one thing that comes back to me is the Pharaoh's dream. the Pharaoh's dream, and I think it was Joseph that interpreted the dream for him. But he had this dream of 7 fat cows, and they were just fat, and the fields were green, and they were eating, and everything was great, and there was plenty of food for the cows. And then he had a dream of, in the same dream, there was 7 skinny cows, and they were gaunt, and they were starving to death, and they were, you could see their ribs, and he wanted to know what it meant. And Joseph told him that the first 7 cows represented a time of plenty, and that there was going to be 7 years of plenty in Egypt, and then there was going to that the 7 skinny cows represented 7 years of famine. And so that what they needed to do is they needed, during the 7 good years, they needed to collect as much grain and store as much food as they could so that they'd be prepared for the 7 famine years. And if you remember the story, not only did they save a lot of people in Egypt and outside of Egypt, but they ended up saving Joseph's very own family through the famine. So I kind of think maybe we're in the 7 years of plenty right now. I don't know if it's going to be 7 years, okay? I'm not saying it's going to be 7 years, 7 months. I don't know what the time frame is, but we are in a time of plenty, and it's a good time to prepare and to just be prudent. It doesn't hurt to prepare. I'm not talking about going out and buying a grenade launcher or a some tactical equipment. If you're into that kind of thing, fine. I think there's other priorities. But it's something to think about. There's some wisdom there. Also, we've got this healthcare crisis looming. The healthcare. They're talking about. I mean, Congress just can't get it together, right? Because we've even got divisions within the Republican Party. We've got people within the Republican Party that think the government is the answer to everything, and then we've got strict constitutionalists that think that government shouldn't be involved in healthcare at all. I kind of side with those constitutionalists. I don't know why they touched it in the first place. We're a country of 360 million people, and they were talking about insuring those 20 million that weren't insured. And as well as I do, is as soon as government touches something, they're going to break it. And break it they did. So now we've got people that either can't get insurance or happen to work 2 jobs to afford insurance. Or, as I heard President Trump tell the story, one lady, it said she needed the insurance, and her insurance premium doubled, and so she had to go get a second job to afford the insurance. But then when she went and got the second job, they said she made too much money and couldn't get that particular plan. So it's just like a catch-22. It's a big darn mess. And so we've got this healthcare crisis looming. A lot of people are getting very, very upset about that. The national debt is going to hit 20 trillion before the end of the year. And, the government they cannot get their spending under control. We've got, part of the spending problem is, that they don't even talk about is unfunded liabilities. So in other words, if you project out what Social Security, the extraction that's going to take place for Social Security recipients, both the retired type and the disabled type, and just, so side note, Obama vastly increased the things under which you could be considered disabled so that you could get Social Security disability. And I have no qualms with people who paid into that retirement program getting their money out. They had it robbed from them, and they certainly deserve to get it back, because it was robbed from them involuntarily in most cases, and they absolutely deserve to get it back. But the math, if you do the math, there's just within a couple of years, there's going to be far more people extracting than there will be paying in. You couple that with the low birth rate of Americans, and we're just right on the threshold. I think they say that you have to have 2.2 children being born to every couple to sustain your economy, and we are just right there. They said that if it wasn't for our south of the border friends that have come to this country that have larger families, that we would be under that right now. And Europe's in that position right now. That's why you see the economies of Europe failing slowly. Asia, China, and Japan have been in that mode for quite some time, and it's really a problem. So they've got all these unfunded liabilities, far more on the books that they're obligated to pay out than they have revenue to pay them, and so the debt just keeps going up and keeps going up. It's equivalent to you or I maxing out a credit card, and we can't use the credit card anymore, so we fill out an application for a new credit card and we roll the balance over because this new credit card has a higher credit limit. One of these days, somebody's going to have to pay the piper on that, and so I don't know when that day is, but it's definitely reached a zenith, I think. I think this time, if we have an economic crash, it's going to make the last recession look small in comparison. We've got a housing bubble building again. I think this time it'll probably be every bit as bad as the one before it. It's already started. The housing crash has already started on bigger, expensive homes. I'm talking about the really, really expensive homes. There's more of them on the market than there has been in probably 10 years, I think I read. So couple all that together. Under the current political climate, the agitators that are against this administration will almost certainly stoke the fires of civil unrest by blaming this administration, and that could possibly lead to civil war. We don't know where that's going to go. So those are my concerns, and let's just talk about the effects that war and civil unrest have. So whether a war is fought on the U.S. soil or not, there's generally suffering for the civilian population. So, we've never had a war fought on U.S. soil before, but there's a first time for everything. I'm sorry, we have fought a war on U.S. soil. Obviously, the Revolutionary War and the Civil War was fought here, but we've really never, since the Revolutionary War, we've never been invaded by another country, and I don't know how likely that is. But if you see China and Russia unite with North Korea, or let's just say something kicks off with Russia over Syria, there's a possibility. There's a possibility. I mean, America's pretty soft right now. Our internal defenses are not that good. A lot of our stuff is deployed overseas. We're spread pretty thin. So, but the thing I want to get across is that the civilian population is usually who suffers, whether it's civilians, overseas or civilians here. You look at what's going on in Syria right now. Those poor people, there's no right side to that deal. You got the Syrian forces, you've got U.S. forces, you've got Russian forces, you've got us backing rebels that are supposedly against Bashar and his government. However, they're also pretty tied to some terrorist groups. There's a pretty thin line as to whether they're good rebels or bad rebels, and a lot of people, think that they are connected with ISIS. And as you listen to the SOFREP podcast, you will get a better grasp on that situation. But that is just a no-win situation. On a positive note, I recently saw an article, it was either today or yesterday, that the Trump administration is going to quit funding the rebels in Syria. And I think that's a wise move. I think we should get out of there. I think that far more civilians have died because we were there fighting against this government than ever would have died if, if he's gassing his people, that's a terrible thing. But I have a hard time believing that this many civilians would have died if we would have just left the situation alone. That region of the world has been on fire for thousands of years. We are not going to change it. We are not going to change it. I think it's very egotistical of us as a country to believe that we can, and I think some bad decisions were made to go there. I'm not a big Obama fan. I don't think anybody would ever mistake me as such. But, really, to be fair, the president that received a Nobel Peace Prize, you know, he we're in more conflicts now than when he came into office. So I'm not sure how that worked out. Um, so anyway, back to the effects of war. So if you read the histories of wars and their effects, such as World War One, World War Two, the Balkan Wars of the 1990s, which was a civil war, and the current events articles about Venezuela and the Argentina crisis of a few decades ago, you start to see some common threads in all of these conflicts. And let me just tell you kind of how it goes down, and you can research this for yourself, and I will put some links in the show notes tonight where you can do some of this research yourself. But Google is your friend. You can find these articles and books all over if you decide you want to make a study of this. But the first thing that happens when there's a crisis, whether it's war or civil unrest, when it's serious, is food rationing is the first thing that happens. We've seen this in World War One. We saw it in World War Two, not only here in the United States but in Europe. We also saw that in Argentina. Are seeing that in Venezuela right now. So the government decides that they're going to ration food. They either take control of the food, or they in a militant way, or they will design some kind of program similar to what we saw in World War II, where they had ration stamps. You had a ration book, and you could only get so much meat, so much cheese, so much sugar, so much fat in a week, so many tires, that type of thing. Um, but that's one thing that you always see happens. If you see those type of things happening, you know that step two is right behind that. The second thing that happens is governments will redefine food storage as hoarding, and they will put laws in place to prevent such, quote, hoarding, and they'll confiscate supposed excesses from the citizens. Now, a really good example of this is a book I'm going to talk about that it was a lady's diary in World War One, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, but that's exactly what they do. The third thing that happens is those that are tasked with confiscating this supposed excess from the citizens, they are almost always corrupt, or they become corrupt because they're trying to feed their family, they're trying to feed their friends, or they're simply opportunists who are trying to capitalize on the situation. We saw that in World War One, we saw it in World War Two, both in Europe and here. We're seeing that now in Venezuela, and I haven't done the research, but I'll just about guarantee you that it happened in Argentina as well. I think the only reason it didn't happen in the Balkans, at least that I've read, was that situation come unraveled so quickly. It was kind of a shock. And I don't know how many of you remember that situation, but in Bosnia, the capital was Sarajevo, and we had the Olympics there just before it all came undone. And Sarajevo was under siege militarily for 44 months, I think. And I think they lost, I can't remember how many people. It was in the thousands of people that they lost to snipers. They couldn't go throughout the city. Anyway, the next thing that happens after the after the food rationing, after the hoarding laws, after the governments become corrupt, people that are supposed to be enforcing those laws or selling stuff, is the black market always emerges. Capitalism is very difficult to hold down. Someone is always going to come up with an alternative market. And we see this in Venezuela right now. We saw it in World War One, World War Two, and definitely in the Balkan Wars. The black market was thriving. A lot of people think that you can store things to barter in those situations, and you can, but that should not be your number one plan, because going to a black market, it's not like you see on the movies where somebody sets up a bazaar and somebody shows up and they're like, hey, could I trade you some honey for some milk? No, it's not like that. If you read a resource that I'm going to give you, a gentleman named Salco, who lived through the Balkan Wars, who was in the siege in Sarajevo. He will tell you it was very dangerous to go trade for things, but they had to do it in some cases because they just didn't have everything that they needed. And so, bartering is good. I would suggest storing things for bartering, absolutely, because you're never going to be able to store everything that you absolutely need in those situations. Another thing I want to talk about, and I'm kind of, all over the place, but as I think of these things, if they're not in my notes, I have to mention them right down, else I won't mention them, and they're important. The other thing I need to mention is you see a lot in the preparedness community about bug out bags, people bugging out and bug out bags and that type of thing. I have a bug out bag. Everybody should have a bug out bag. I differ a little bit on what's in my bug out bag. I mean, I'm not some soldier, some tactical warrior. I'm not going to have all this stuff, although I do keep a firearm in my bug out bag. But, basically for me, my bug out bag is something that I would grab if I needed to be away from home in a hurry, like if there was an evacuation or something like that. If I needed to be away from the home for, 2 or 3 days. But bugging out should not be your number one plan. Your number one plan should be to shelter in place. You're far more likely to survive. Sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes you become a refugee in wartime, and you'll have to deal with that if it comes up. But the best thing you can do is to stay in place if at all possible. That's your best chance for survival. All right, so let's go back to the threads that happen. So the next thing that happens is money can be worth almost nothing. We saw that happen in Europe in World War I. We've seen that happen in Argentina. We've seen that happen in Venezuela right now. I tried to find the chart, but it's like off the chart how they used to be able to trade one of their bolivars for a US dollar. I think it was 2 bolivars to 1. Now it's something like it. I may get this number wrong, but it's like in the thousands. It's thousands of bolivars to $1. So imagine if you're in Argentina and you're making a certain amount of money, and one day $2 buys a loaf of bread, and the next day it's it didn't happen overnight, but it happened relatively quickly. The next day it's $6,000 to buy a loaf of bread. That's the situation that they are dealing with in Venezuela right now, and I'm going to read some articles about Venezuela to you in just a moment. Okay, so money can be worth almost nothing. We've seen that happen. I'm sure it happened in the Balkan Wars in certain sections, even though maybe the currency wasn't devalued, but it was just the fact that nobody wanted the money. The food was more important. Medical supplies were more important. All right, so certain items will always hold value in these situations, and let's just talk about what those items are as I see that. The number one thing is food. That's the number one thing is food. You will see that in any story you read, it's food. It's food, it's food, it's food. It's not guns. I mean, it can be guns, but the number one thing on there is food. And if you're not getting it, it's food. Okay? Food and water. Food and water. The next thing is common medications. I'm talking about things that you just take for granted that you can go buy at the Walmart right now. You can buy Tylenol and Advil and Preparation H and sunscreen and things like that. So cheap at Walmart right now. Things that you just like take for granted. Venezuela was a rich country. They had oil, that was their main export, and they had jobs, and there was a lot of American companies down there investing things. And even though the socialist policies of Maduro led them to where they are today, not Maduro. Maduro is the guy now. I can't remember the other guy's name. Anyway, those policies led to where they are today. Another thing that led them to the situation they're in now is having all their eggs in one economic basket. So their main export was oil, and everything was based on the oil. They were not diversified. So we can take a lesson for that as a country. We can also take a lesson for that personally. If your income is coming from one source, we are in a very brittle economic landscape right now. Things are changing. I don't think that most people recognize the impact that technology is going to have on the job market. And it's going to happen fast because things in technology move fast. So you need to develop right now, you need to develop other ways of making money. And I know a lot of you are doing that. Um, I see a lot of you selling soap and selling seeds and you do things, on your homesteads to make money. You need to develop some alternative sources of income. And I would suggest that you really look into starting your own business that you have something to fall back on. Because really, I can tell you that the only job security you have, no matter how good you think your job is if you own your own business. Because everything else is out of your control. When you own your own business, you can control how the business is run, um, your how much marketing you do, all the things that you complain about when you work for somebody else that are just crazy. You see them making crazy decisions. Well, all those decisions become yours. It's not easy, but it can be done. And the main thing I would tell you to look for, and we'll have a whole nother podcast on this someday, but the main thing, if you don't have a business going now and you don't have a business idea, you want to look for problems. You want to look for problems and pain that people are having. If you can solve a problem or you can solve pain people have, it creates opportunity for you. So I have a little thing on my fridge. It just says problems plus solution equal opportunity. And that's, what I can give you in a nutshell of, every business you can think of is built on that framework. Amazon, right? Arguably one of the most successful businesses right now. They take away people's pain. They make it convenient to shop. Who wants to get in the car? I don't. Who wants to get in the car and go to town and fight the traffic and, park, try to find a parking spot, go in the store, look for your item. They may or may not have it. Then you come out and you have to wait in a line to buy your thing. Then you have to go find your car, get in your car, drive through the traffic again and come home when you can simply click a button and it shows up in 2 days. They take away people's pain. That's what they do. If you want a successful business, figure out how to take away people's pain, figure out how to solve a problem, look for problems, embrace problems. Anyway, I'm going to get off that one because we're getting way off topic. I can go down a lot of rabbit holes, so I apologize. I am not looking at the comments right now at all. I'm not ignoring you, but I know myself and I know I will get distracted if I read them. So I will read them after we get done here. All right, so food, common medications, antibiotics. You've got a golden opportunity right now, although as sad as it is, to observe what's going on in Venezuela because it is going right down the pattern of how it always goes down, and people cannot get medications right now. Prescription drugs. If you are on prescription drugs, if there's any possibility that you can get off them by improving your health, do it now. It's the best thing that you can do for yourself. I promise you. So those things have value. Tobacco always has value. People have habits. I don't smoke. I don't drink. I don't even drink coffee. But the fact of the matter is, you will see these common threads. You will see that cigarettes, alcohol, are valuable in these types of situations. So you can't store tobacco for any length of time, but I'll tell you what I do have in my storage. I have tobacco seeds. And, they're in my freezer, and I know how to grow enough stuff. I think I could probably grow some tobacco if I needed to. Alcohol will store forever. And the last thing on that list is guns and ammo. Those things are valuable in these situations, not only to yourself to protect your home and your family, but they are highly tradable items. So there are other things that are valuable, but those are the basic things. And I've always thought it interesting, just a little a side note, something to think about. Isn't it interesting that we have a Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms? Three things that you don't normally see together. It gives a person pause. Anyway, I want to tell you about some scenarios that kind of illustrate the things we've been talking about. So I have a collection of war letters from my grandparents. My grandpa was serving in World War II. My grandma was here at home raising my mom. And my mom was just a little baby when my grandpa got drafted. And they had built a home and they had a garden. And anyway, I have these war letters where they're writing back and forth. And really, they almost wrote each other every day, sometimes twice a day. And they're very poignant letters. And they're a young married couple. And so they're, they've got, they're pretty flirty. And some of the flirtiness is very personal. And but there's some very valuable lessons in there. And I remember distinctly this one letter where my grandfather is telling my grandmother, how's the corn coming along that we planted in the garden? This is right after he got drafted. How's that corn coming along? And he says to her, make sure that you can that corn and put it away. He says, I think times are going to get tough. And of course, we know from history that times did get tough. Now, my grandpa could see the writing on the wall. And the reason that he could see the writing on the wall is he had lived through it already. He was born in 1919. And as you know, the stock market crashed for the Great Depression in 1929. And so he would have been 10 years old at that time. So I don't know about you, but that's about when I start remembering things, when I'm 8, 9, 10 years old. So his whole teenage years, his whole growing up time was right through the heart of the Great Depression. And he told me many, many stories about how tough things were. And so he saw the writing on the wall. He knew how tough things could get, and he told my grandma to can this corn up. I also remember my grandma writing back to him, talking about things that are available to us so easily. My grandma wrote back to him that she was going to get together with her sisters and with my grandma, my great grandma, excuse me, and they were going to rent, get this, rent a pressure canner so that they could all get together and can up their stuff. And, a constant theme through the letters is money, that they are just so broke, and they're just barely getting by. And so, I looked the other day and you could pick up a canner, an aluminum pressure canner for, I don't know, like $50, I think I saw one for, sometimes we spend that on a nice meal for our families sometimes. So, the other thing that was frequent in these letters was rationing, how the rationing was affecting everything. They rationed all kinds of things in the States through World War II. Now, certainly it wasn't as bad as the rationing that was going on in Europe, but it was definitely hard times for people in America. In Europe, it was much, much, much worse. And okay, a second thing I want to talk to you about is a book that's called Blockade, Diary of an Austrian Middle-Class Woman. And it's a book about Austria being under siege, basically being blockaded from any trade coming in during World War I. This is a story of a war being fought in her own country and how that affected everything. We see the same threads in this story. We see rationing, we see food hoarding laws, and just a little side note, there was an executive order by Obama called the National Defense Resource Preparedness Executive Order. Has some very interesting language about the government being able to seize food sources. Some people have extrapolated that out to they may be able to come to your home or your farm and requisition these resources. Now, I've read it. The language is a little vague. Could it be extrapolated to mean that? I believe that if the government wanted to, it could. Some people, don't believe that. But if we look at history, that follows right down the line, doesn't it? With what we've seen in these other situations. So, there was, in this story with this lady, there was enforcer corruption. She tells the story about the guy that was coming around, to take the food from them to supposedly put it all in a big pile and give everyone their fair share. Does that sound familiar? Um, this guy was able to be bought. Her husband had a large selection and collection of expensive cigars, and she was able to trade those to this guy for certain things, stuff that he had robbed from other people and was supposed to turn in. And she was able to trade those things with him. She was able to trade another farmer some other things that she had. And she did preserve her wealth. Interestingly enough, she did preserve her wealth by turning some of her investments into gold. But during the time of the food shortages and during the time of the war, the gold was literally worth nothing. It was of no help to her during the war. Money wasn't worth anything. Food was everything. There was also, a black market, as I've indicated, and so that came about. All right, so let's talk about Venezuela. Venezuela right now is in a state of very serious civil unrest due to their economy. It hasn't broke out into civil war yet, but I don't think that's too far in the future. I don't see any peaceful way out for Venezuela. The government took control of the food industry and grocery stores. They basically, they were basically not able to get any food into these grocery stores, and so the government blamed that on the grocery stores and said they just weren't trying hard enough. But it was actually the government policies that weren't allowing the food to get in, and corruption and that type of thing. So the government took control of the food industry and the grocery stores, and things predictably got worse. They started rationing food. They instituted hoarding laws, made it illegal to have more than a certain amount of thing, made it illegal to buy more than a certain amount of thing. And as always, the black market emerged, including buying from the soldiers who are supposed to be enforcing the hoarding and rationing regulations. I read one story where somebody with a lot of money was able to bribe, some hijackers were able to bribe the soldiers that were protecting trucks full of food coming into Venezuela and hijack the entire truck full of food that was coming in from Colombia, I think it was. So I'm going to, you can see these common threads every single time. And so, those are just kind of how history repeats itself. They've also had currency revaluation after revaluation after revaluation. So let me just read you these articles about Venezuela. It says, the title of this one is Things Are So Bad in Venezuela That People Are Rationing Toothpaste. All right. Tear gas wafts up from among the buildings in, I can't, my Spanish is terrible, so I'll try my best to pronounce these names and stuff. Chacao, I don't know, municipality of Caracas during anti-government protests on June 12th. That's the title of this photo. It's along with the article. So it says Guaranas, Venezuela. 5 years ago, when Hugo Chavez, yep, that's the guy's name, was president, and Venezuela was a much different place. Ana Margarita Rangel could still afford to go to the movies and the beach or to buy ingredients that she needed to bake cakes. Even 3 years ago, when the country's economy was beginning a severe contraction, Rangel earned enough for an occasional treat, such as a soda or an ice cream. Now she spends everything she earns to fend off hunger. Her shoes are tattered and torn, but she cannot afford new ones. A tube of toothpaste costs half a week's wages. I've always loved brushing my teeth right before I go to sleep. I mean, that's the rule, right? Said Rangel, who lives in a hillside slum 25 miles west of Caracas, the capital, and works in a cosmetic factory down in the suburban city of Guaranas. Now I have to choose, she said, so I do it only in the mornings. Anita Margarita Rangel earns the minimum wage working in a cosmetic factory in the Caracas suburbs of Guaranas. She earns the minimum wage, as does 32% of Venezuela's workforce, according to the most recent official numbers released in 2015. Now, this article was written in July of this year, so you can see that the government is like not functioning. They're not even putting out. I mean, I read an article where they were running out of paper to print new currency. That's how bad it's got. Let's see. The most recent official numbers available, released in 2015, that used to mean something in a country with the world's largest oil reserves and a socialist government led by Chavez that presented itself as a champion of Venezuelan workers. But 700% annual inflation and chronic shortages of food and medicine have changed the meaning of Venezuela's minimum in profoundly painful ways. I remember times when, like they say around here, we were millionaires and we didn't even know it, Rangel said. Venezuela's intensifying economic and political crisis has brought thousands of anti-government protesters into the streets over the past 3 months, and at least 75 people have died in the unrest. A large number of Venezuelans are spending everything they earn to avoid starving. The minimum wage is enough to buy 1/4 of the food needed by a family of 5 in 1 month, according to the calculations by the Center of Documentation and Analysis for Workers, an independent advocacy group. Workers packaged bread to sell at a bakery in Caracas in March. The government has ordered bakers to use scarce supplies of flour to produce price-controlled loaves, allocating only 10% to make unregulated pastries. On July 1st, President Nicolas Maduro raised the monthly minimum wage for the third time this year to about 250,000 strong bolivars worth of cash and food stamps, a 20% increase. With Venezuela's currency rapidly losing value, the new minimum wage is enough for only about 6 pounds of milk powder or 5 cartons of eggs. I just want you to think about that. The new minimum wage can buy 6 pounds of milk powder or 5 cartons of eggs. Not both, one or the other. At the country's informal exchange rate, the raise brings the average worker's income to roughly $33 per month. That is far below the minimum monthly wage in neighboring Colombia, which is about $250 a month. Or get this, even in Haiti, where it's $135 a month. Now, we all know how poor Haiti is, right? In Haiti, the minimum wage is $135 a month. And, these are American dollars. And in Venezuela, it's $33 per month. The government set price caps on some basic food items such as pasta, rice, and flour, but those items can usually be obtained only by standing in lines for hours or by signing up to receive a subsidized monthly grocery box from the government with enough to feed a family of 5 for about a week. Since 2014, the proportion of Venezuelan families in poverty has soared from 48% to 82%, according to a study published this year by the country's leading universities. 52% of families live in extreme poverty, according to the survey, and about 31% survive on 2 meals a day per day at most. Households that depend on breadwinners earning up to twice the minimum wage are in the latter group. With Chavez, we were doing much better, said Romer Sarabia, 44, a security guard at a government health clinic in a town 35 miles from Caracas. On payday, he said, he used to take his family out for soup, and I would buy candy for the children. Every 2 weeks, Sarabia goes to an informal market near his home and buys about 2 pounds of sugar, a pound of milk powder, 9 pounds of broken grain rice that smells of bird food and is typically used as chicken feed. He seasons it with bones or scrap meat. His 3 children and wife supplement that with whatever they are able to grow in nearby fields, mostly plantains, yucca, and mangoes, unless their neighbors steal their crops. I just want you to pay attention to that. Unless their neighbors steal their crops. Desperate people will do desperate things. What's going to happen with us if we continue like this for another year, he said, looking at his wife, who nodded and smiled weakly. Rangel, the cosmetic factory worker, considers herself lucky because she pools her income with the earnings of her 3 sons. But even with 4 adults making minimum wage, the refrigerator is almost always empty. The family has eliminated beef, chicken, salad, and fruit from its diet. Instead, Rangel and her sons eat rice, beans, yucca, plantains, sardines, and sometimes eggs. We used to be able to have juice with our meals. I miss it so much, she said. And chocolate. We can't even afford to buy a little cup of coffee on our way to work, she said. In Rangel's neighborhood, it's not uncommon to find people like Rainier Figueroa, a 30-year-old with sleepy eyes who has lost a significant amount of weight. Figueroa has shed 24 pounds in the past 6 months, he said, because his minimum wage is only enough for him to eat small portions of food twice a day. The rest of the groceries are for his wife and his 3 children. Figueroa said he stopped playing soccer this year. I can't afford to burn calories or to wear out my sneakers, he said. Just 3 years ago, the family would go to a nearby shopping mall for fast food meals to celebrate Mother's Day and Father's Day. There would be enough money to pay for bus rides to public parks on the weekends. It didn't used to be like this, he said, with his 7-year-old son standing barefoot beside him. Children play in the slum where Margarita Rangel lives with her 3 grown sons. But even with 4 adults pooling their minimum wage income, the family's refrigerator is almost always empty. Sorry, that was a caption from a photograph. Figueroa works at a diaper factory that has stopped producing diapers. I want you to just grasp the socialism right there. He is working at a diaper factory and getting paid for it, but the factory doesn't make any diapers. Yeah, and there's lots of industries like that. There's a brewery that isn't making any beer that people are getting paid to work at too by the government. Yeah, it's crazy land down there. Many Venezuelan plants are operating at half capacity or less, a situation many economists blame on government mismanagement of prices and currency rates. You think? Since taking office in 2013 after Chavez's death, Maduro has decreed 16 increases to the minimum wage, but the purchasing power afforded by the raises in pay is wiped out almost as soon as the ink dries on his orders. In the past 3 years, the country's economy has contracted by 24.5%, including 11% in 2016, according to the independent firm Econoanalytica. Wage raises make it all worse because if you don't take productivity into account, you'll just generate more inflation, said Mr. Oliveras, director of Econoanalytica. This year, people's purchasing power is headed down to 40%. Every weekday, Rangel wakes up at 4 a.m. to take 2 buses from the slum to the factory. When she comes home around 2 p.m., she doesn't do much. I don't spend my afternoons cooking anymore because I don't have meat to season or vegetables to cut, she says. Gone are the days when her neighbors would get together for barbecues and dance parties. She said she doesn't even like meeting with her friends anymore. We always end up talking about those things we can't get anymore, she said, with her eyes welling up with tears. She turns on television instead. I love watching the Kardashians because you see how people there have everything. You see how people that have everything live, she said. And for a moment, you forget what your life is like. I don't know about you guys, but that just makes me cry. It just makes me cry. And if someone thinks that that can't happen here, I think you're sadly mistaken. I'm not saying that it's probable, but I think it's a mistake to think that things like that can't happen here. Things have happened here like that. Read about the Great Depression. It was a convergence of events, and also read how the government tried to get us out of it, and how none of the programs that they implemented actually worked. I mean, I would say the one improvement of the government programs that we had then were that instead of putting people to work in a diaper factory that doesn't make diapers, they would put people to work building dams and highways and bridges and things that we still use today. But really, it was still creating a false economy. And we really never did get out of the Great Depression until World War II. War always brings an economy out of a depressive situation. There are some that, some tinfoil hat folks that lean towards the tinfoil hat area that think that, that Roosevelt purposely got us into World War II because nothing was working. Nothing was working. The Great Depression lasted right up until and through a little bit of World War II. Started in 29. World War II started in 42. So we got bombed in Pearl Harbor in 41. So, do that math. So anyway, I don't mean to be all like doom and gloom. Um, but you can learn some lessons from reading these things. One thing that you can learn is that things you take for granted today may not be here tomorrow, and things that you spend money on today that or maybe a thing how can I say this, that you think they're normal or maybe just a little bit extravagant, you would want to get those things back, and that money back so that you could um, spend it on things that really, really matter. There is another article here on Venezuela. Let me just scan through it really quick. I want to just read a couple excerpts from it. This is an interview with a guy named, a gentleman, a kid, 22 years old, named Tyler, that is one of the regular protesters, and it talks about how the protests have got very violent. Tyler said that he was fighting because of medicine shortages that had killed his mother, worsened his grandmother's high blood pressure, and left his asthmatic little sister gasping. He said his family could only afford one meal a day, usually just plain white rice. We are living with a hunger that we have never had before, he said. Things are already really ugly here, and we just won't take it anymore. Let me just find this other section that I wanted to read to you. He also said, if they don't kill us here protesting, we will die either way. Be killed for a cell phone or a pair of sneakers, or we will die of hunger, or die simply from catching any disease because there is no medicine here. That was Marco, a graduate student, that said that. Let's just see here. There was one other thing I wanted to read. Oh, and one thing I wanted to mention about Venezuela is they don't have any guns there. Gun control was put in place many, many years ago. And so it talks about what they are fighting the government with. They said they turned to swim goggles and plastic soda bottles into makeshift gas masks, create shin guards from old magazines and duct tape. Others had fashioned armor from carpet scraps to thwart rubber bullets and buckshot, which are lethal at close range. More than 30 protesters have died this way, according to a tally by local journalists. He says, don't knock it, one protester said with a grin when asked about his carpet vest. It has already saved me several times. Many carry homemade shields of wood and oil drums. Some are adorned with Venezuela's flags, cartoons of Maduro burning the Constitution, or phrases like freedom future, elections now, and I love you, Mom. During the March for Health, thousands of doctors and nurses and patients protested the crippled public health system. They held signs made from empty drug boxes with messages like SOS, without medicine, they're also killing us. Let's see. Says that when the soldiers used tear gas on them, the doctors in white lab coats locked arms, gagging with tears streaming, but they refused to budge. Okay, I'm just looking through here really quick. Bear with me. Yeah, I think that's it. But anyway, you guys get the picture. And so after all that doom and gloom, well, let me tell you about one other thing. I want you guys to look up on YouTube. There's a series called Wartime Farm Series. It was put out by the BBC, and I think there's some pirated versions out there that you can watch. I don't know how pirated they are, but they're available in 3 or 4 places. It's a several-part series. I would suggest that you watch that when you get a chance if you're interested in this kind of thing. One more thing I want to talk about, the Baltic Wars, Sarajevo, Bosnia. There was a guy named Selko. This was a civil war, and Selko found himself inside of Sarajevo. It happened very fast, and they had snipers, and they were living in bombed out buildings. And I'll put some links to his story so that you can read that as well. During the Great Depression, that happened here, 25, I just want you to think about this. 25% of the population farmed at that time. Do you have any guesses how many people are farming today? It's 2%. 2% of our population is farming today. Now, I don't know if that includes the gardeners, but just based on my friends and the people I run around with, not many people garden anymore. A lot of people think, I mean, I live in a pretty rural neighborhood in what used to be a farming community, and it's kind of turned into a resort community. And my neighbors think I'm crazy. A lot of my neighbors really think I'm crazy and extreme because we raise our own food. And you look at the populations of the big cities, nobody's growing their food there. Yeah, 2%, Heather. That's a statistic that I looked up today. All right, so, okay, I'm going to get out of the doom and gloom now. We're going to talk about solutions. The first thing you need to do after hearing all this is don't panic. Although challenging times are almost certainly ahead, we still have time right now. Don't obsess over this. You can't afford to obsess. You need to spend this time not wringing your hands and making yourself sick with worry. A lot of these forces that, are making these problems are bigger than any one person. There's almost nothing you can do about it as an individual to change it, short of voting for the best people that you think are in charge, and realizing that government is rarely the solution to anything. You have to accept that there's forces outside of your control. But what you can do is take a positive attitude and take some well thought out action. Action is always the antidote for fear, but it has to be well thought out action. So the first thing that you can do is you just need to stay calm. The second thing you can do is you can learn lessons for those who have survived war before. As depressing as it is, when you read these stories, you can learn a lot about what you should be doing, what things you should be storing, how you should be preparing. And we don't want to come from a position of fear, but we want to come from a position of being prudent and being wise and being like Joseph and, storing up something against a rainy day. It doesn't have to be war. It could be an illness in your family, a prolonged illness. It could be somebody loses a job. It could be a death in the family. These things, these SHTF or crisis things happen to people every day, all around you. And, by preparing, you're insulating your family against the things that happen every day to people as well as the big things. And you can make your family more resilient. And that's what we're all about here at the Forging Freedom podcast, is helping you to forge your individual liberty and freedom by and through more self-sufficient living. So the third thing that I would do is I would sit down after you read these things and you give it some thought and you're in a calm state of mind. Don't get your credit card and just go down to Walmart and start buying a bunch of things, because you'll buy the wrong things. You'll buy too much of something and not enough of something else. And you'll be panicked, but you'll feel like you did something. Don't do that. Sit down, make a list. The first thing that should be a priority on your list is water, food, and medicine. That's first. So those are the things that you need to work on first. Security would be a close second for me. Prioritize the list after you get these things written down, and then start systematically knocking things off the list one by one and acquiring these things. Don't acquire things that you can't use in peacetime or good times. I mean, you need to be storing things that have use even if nothing goes wrong. Okay? Don't be buying, a lot of people go buy this food that's good for 30 years, and I'm not against that, but some of that food is pretty crappy, and if your family is not used to eating that on a regular basis, they're not going to want to eat it in a crisis. Um, a crisis is a big enough change in and of itself. People want to eat the things that they're familiar with and that are comfortable with. The less change you can have in the diet, the better. You see from these stories the things that people miss. They miss their old way of eating, and psychologically that takes an effect on them. So if you can keep that normalized as much as possible, that's really good. If you're eating in such a way now that you can't store the types of food you're eating, see if you can adjust your eating a little bit. Have beans and rice once a week. They're very easy to store, but if you're not used to eating beans and rice, you're not going to really be thrilled about it. So it's a balance between, being an ostrich and sticking your head in the sand and saying these things can never happen, or getting so focused on preparing and prepping that you forget to smell the roses. So don't forget to smell the roses. Enjoy the sun when the sun's out. Enjoy the rain when it rains because it waters things and it refreshes the earth. But try to keep that balance. Try to keep a good mindset and have a positive attitude. The other thing that I would suggest is, if you're not doing it already, learn how to grow your own food. And if you're growing your own food now, step it up a level. Step it up in thinking that if I had to survive on what I grow, how would I go about it? How could I grow enough in the summer that I could preserve it through the winter and have enough, to sustain my family all year long? Work on seasonal eating, work on eating the things that as they come into season. Um, get things now while they're readily available. We live in a time of plenty and peace. We're in the 7 fat cow years. So, buy those things now. It is so cheap to go to Walmart and get Tylenol and Advil and just the things that you use all the time that you kind of take for granted. It wasn't that many years ago that babies would die from having a fever that was too high just because they had nothing to give the baby that would bring the fever down. Um, you know, that can come roaring right back if you don't have medical facilities and learn herbal remedies. I think I'd focus on the medicines that work first, and then try to increase your knowledge about the herbal stuff. But take responsibility for your health. Have the members of your family take responsibility for their health. And if you're the nurturer, typically it's the mother that's the nurturer in a family, or the grandma. Um, you know, you be the one to gain the skills to be able to take care of your family. Um, So anyway, that's kind of all I have to say on that. I know that was really long and somewhat depressing, but I hope that you, in the end here, you got some hope and that you feel empowered that you can take action, that these things aren't inevitable if you prepare for them. Um, I'd suggest that you listen to the other podcast that I did on the subject as well, because there's some things I did say in this one that I didn't say in the other one, and vice versa. So let me go to the comments here and just take a look at some of the comments, and I'll just start at the bottom and work backwards. Let's see. Heather says, we're going to be moving back to an urban area where we would be planting a garden. Heather, I think that is fantastic. I'm so excited to hear that. Suburban Hillbilly says, be right back that the dogs need to go out. I get that one. Pacific Permaculture says, now I need a drink. Sorry, PP. Yeah, Heather says 2%. Hey, Pacific, if you're going to drink, buy some extra and put it in your storage. Let's see. Pacific Permaculture says, build a first aid kit to take if you leave in a hurry. That is a good idea. That is a really good idea. Look at all the things that have happened. Pacific could tell you. He lives in California. Look at all the things that have happened with wildfires in California and how quickly. I mean, it even happened right here in Utah. They had the fire down there at Bryan Head, which is a ski resort area, mountainous area down south. They had a man-caused fire down there, and people had to evacuate. This is a topic for another time, but I don't want to overwhelm you and verbally vomit on you with so much information that you feel paralyzed and don't take any action, but I'll float this idea out there. It would be good to make a list of if you had an hour to evacuate, what would you take with you? And it helps to organize those things that you would take in a manner that they could be quickly grabbed. And then break that down. What if I only had a half hour to evacuate? What if I had 15 minutes? And then you can go the other way too. What if I had 4 hours? What if I had a day? What if I had 3 days? And kind of war game that out so that if something like that happens to you and you have to evacuate for whatever reason, that you've already pre-thought it out. It's very difficult to think clearly in a crisis situation. And that's why the military does so much training. They train the soldiers over and over and over again with different tasks, because when you're under stress, you don't even operate at the level of your training. You operate somewhat under that, but if you have no training, you're really sunk. Let's see. Pacific Permaculture says South American economies are long dead. Let's see. Pacific says Trump will nuke North Korea. There only be the island of South Korea left. I think they're the same island, but I could be wrong there. Suburban says, hey, I never got the notification. Yeah, YouTube, their videos like mine aren't super popular with YouTube, so I'm not really surprised. Heather says, we've got no business being over there. I think she means Syria. I agree with you. All right, so I'm just going to refresh my screen here because I think there's probably some stuff that I missed. And, that's one disadvantage of living a little bit rural. You don't always have the best internet connection, but, we do what we can with what we got. All right. Okay, looks like we're all up to date. So, you guys, I think I'm going to wrap things up tonight. I've cranked out 2 podcasts today, and I've almost done 3 hours of podcasting. And so I'm a little bit bushed, ready to do a little bit of relaxing. And so I'm going to just go over my notes here and make sure that I have done everything the way I wanted to. Let's see. Oh, again, I want to thank you, those of you that are using our Amazon links in the show note below to do your Amazon shopping. And again, it doesn't cost you a dime extra to use that link, and you can shop for anything you want, and we get a small commission. It really helps us to bring you valuable content and improve the channel. We're dedicated to do that. Also, if you haven't subscribed yet and you like what we're doing here at the Forging Freedom podcast, please hit the like button. Make sure you're subscribed. And if you know someone who likes this kind of stuff, please help us out and help them out by sharing the channel with them. So anyway, guys, God bless you. I hope you're all doing well. And I hope that all good things come your way. Remember to love those around you, to love God. And thanks for tuning in, everybody. Have a great evening, and remember to go out today and tomorrow and do something to forge your freedom. See you soon.